John Carpenter is one of the defining faces of horror cinema. Very few directors have had such a colossal impact on an entire genre. I'm gonna tell two stories about John Carpenter. The first is one I've actually briefly discussed in another video. His first feature film, Halloween, has only 4 kill scenes and 1 off-screen murder, insanely low by the standards of the subgenre it helped shape. Now, most of the murders are overtly connotated with sex. Michael Myers is fueled by some ill-defined psychosexual urge, some particular curiosity toward both lust and violence that can't be understood by us petty mortals. So we get the famous sex equals death trope. 2 people have sex and proceed to both be murdered horribly. One of them gets throttled topless with a phone cable. Jamie Lee Curtis's Laurie hears her grunt and struggle over the phone and assumes that she called her during sex. Laurie is the final girl, the one who makes it out alive. She's also much more reserved than her peers. She's the good babysitter, the one who actually looks after the kids. And that leads to one of the big contemporary criticisms of Halloween. Many saw this as rewarding Laurie for her virtue, her sexual purity, while the sexually active characters are all punished. In response to this interpretation, Carpenter is quoted as saying, "They completely missed the boat there, I think, because if you turn it around, the one girl who is the most sexually uptight just keeps stabbing the guy with a long knife. She's the most sexually frustrated. She's the one that killed him." As a side note, she does not kill him in this movie, nor does anyone, but when she lashes out and attacks him, she delays him long enough that someone else can swoop in and save her at the end. But of course, it's entirely possible that he means it metaphorically. Anyway, not because she's a virgin, but because all that repressed energy starts coming out. She uses all those phallic symbols on the guy. She and the killer have a certain link. Sexual repression. The second story is about a movie from 10 years later. They Live is about a nameless drifter played by Rowdy Roddy Piper from The Wrestlings. He acquires sunglasses that allow him to see the true nature of the world. Beneath every advertisement and piece of corporate merch is a blunt command to spend, conform, forfeit your free will, and some of the most powerful people are actually aliens who have planted these messages everywhere. He suffers this intense revelation that the world has never been what he was told it was. One of many times Carpenter has taken a cue from his contemporary David Cronenberg. The reveal of the true sentiments lends itself to some repeatedly striking cinema, which is repeatedly ruined whenever Roddy Piper starts talking.
Real fucking ugly.
I swear to God, sometimes I see something in a John Carpenter movie that makes me wonder if the Apocalypse trilogy was just good by accident. Anyway, he sets out to slaughter as many of the aliens as he can. There's not much coherence to it. It's hardly an insurrection. It's more of a knee-jerk, lashing out as a reaction to the horrifying state of everything around him. Still marching to the Cronenberg drums. They Live is not an especially subtle metaphor. It's about capitalism and consumerism. Shocking, I know. It's a movie about a guy given the power to understand exactly how he's being exploited and to recognize every exploiter, and the furious response he has to that. No surprise that a movie like this would be born out of the Reagan era, right? And then, you might have seen this coming, some anti-Semitic right-wing conspiracy nuts took a shine to the movie. Neo-Nazis gathered in the slimiest basements of the internet to discuss how the aliens are clearly an allegory for Jewish people secretly ruling the world, and a noble man launches a holy crusade against them. And in response to this, Carpenter tweeted in 2017, "They Live is about yuppies and unrestrained capitalism. It has nothing to do with Jewish control of the world, which is slander and a lie." So I think the link between these stories is clear. In both cases, some group of people looked at Carpenter's film and saw regressive right-wing messaging in it. The difference is whether they thought that was a bad thing or a good thing. And in both cases, Carpenter took enough offense to the interpretation to speak up. In the case of Halloween, the element of punishing the sinners, of horror as morality play, wouldn't be anything new. Think back to your childhood. Did you ever get warned with a story of a boogeyman that eats kids who stay up past their bedtime or steal from the cookie jar or whatever? A lot of horror is about punishment, casting the victims as selfish, rude, or hedonistic, as though that would mean they deserve their horrific fate. The survivors are those who are sinless and or repentant, but to default to assuming that every scary story is playing that game could be argued to be kind of a shallow reflection, like kindergarten morality, What do the characters do? Are the characters rewarded or punished for what they do? Halloween's approach to morality is ultimately really blunt. Someone should make a video about that. But with what Carpenter said, he practically invites further criticism. He describes the phallus as a symbol of empowerment. For Laurie to overcome her attacker, she must arm herself with a phallus and then penetrate him with it. I could keep talking, but I think you can probably infer the rest. And when it comes to They Live, when I first watched the movie, my biggest thought was, this sure is a movie about neoliberal consumerism, exploitation, and inequality. And my second biggest thought was, it's really unfortunate how much this has in common with the worst takes imaginable. And maybe that says something about those neo-Nazi conspiracy theorists. It's uncomfortable how easily these wires can be crossed, how easily someone can be told capitalism is bad, and here there is an evil cabal of Jewish people ruling the world. And I suspect that this happens because those right-wingers are fully capable of recognizing injustice, they just can't accept that injustice is part of the system functioning correctly. If they were to accept that, their entire worldview would be overthrown. So they always need a scapegoat. They need an answer for everything. It's not capitalism, it's cronyism. You're not underpaid because your boss is greedy, it's because of welfare and healthcare and probably also shoplifting. And the hellscape of neoliberal consumerism wasn't carved by a powerful caste in a largely public manner. No, it's the fault of a secret society of Jewish conspirators. Reactionaries have always seen Jewish people as an acceptable target. One of the classic fash tactics is to characterize a certain demographic as outsider and enemy. They have no self-awareness though, and don't realize that if you target a vulnerable class with violence and aspersion, cast them as a disproportionately powerful exploiter, you're doing the dirty work of the actual powerful exploiters. So I have to say, I think it was good for Carpenter to speak up, to tell them that he as a director does not condone his work being associated with Nazism. By doing this, he clarifies to the Jewish audience and to anyone who doesn't side with fascists that he doesn't support that ideology and that his work was never meant to be read that way. And he clarifies to the neo-Nazis that if they're gonna make his work into a white supremacist manifesto, they'll do it without his support and against his wishes. Of course, there's not really anything he can do to actually stop them from seeing it that way, any more than the Wachowskis could stop the alt-right from using The Matrix. But something that intrigues me is the way Carpenter went about it. And I don't just mean the particular wording of unrestrained capitalism. I'm referring to the wording of slander and a lie. You could assume he's referring to the conspiracy theory as slandering the Jewish community, but the way he seems to mean it and the way it's generally been reported on is that he's being slandered. And of course, one of the fastest ways to communicate that you condemn a belief or movement is to indicate disgust or offense at the notion of being associated with it. But I keep wanting to ask, is he expressing more distaste with the hateful fascists, or with the idea that people would have the wrong take on his work? Taking the bit about They Live on its own, I wouldn't give it a second glance. It's in conjunction with the Halloween story that I hesitate, because in both cases, Carpenter is kind of presuming to declare the right and wrong takeaways from his movie. You know, I do think there is such a thing as a bad reading. Sometimes I see an interpretation of a movie or book or whatever that is just at odds with the text, that betrays poor faith or a presupposed conclusion or the projection of a limited perspective, but I don't think it'd be fair to say that all interpretations I disagree with just came out of nowhere. Even if I think there's much more to be said about gender in Halloween than just whether or not someone is punished for their actions, I can see why someone would come out of it thinking that way. You don't need to bust out the magnifying glass to note that the sexual characters die while the virgin survives. And while I think I've already made it clear that I find anti-Semitic conspiracy theories reprehensible, I can also tell why an anti-Semitic conspiracy theorist would watch They Live and feel validated. In both cases, Carpenter asserts that there is a correct meaning and that some people are missing or twisting it. And in neither case does he concede an understanding of why someone would come to the reading he deems aberrant. With a response to Halloween, he doesn't say, "I see where you're coming from, but," and he doesn't say, "Consider this interpretation." He says, "I think they missed the boat. They failed to understand." And with the response to They Live, he doesn't say it's unfortunate that that interpretation could happen, doesn't express regret for his film's resemblance to David Icke-style theorizing. He doesn't even really condemn the anti-Semitism. He just says, "No, you misunderstand. This is what the movie is actually about." And of course, I recognize that making the anti-Nazi statement is crucial no matter what, and I recognize that these statements were both likely composed quickly and with some degree of emotion behind them. I'm not going to sit here and point fingers at John Carpenter for for not giving a flawless response each time, but I think it's reflective of a common sentiment that a failed catch is never the fault of the pitcher. Communication is ultimately about both delivering signs and receiving them, and when someone picks up a meaning that you didn't intend, that doesn't automatically mean that the failure is theirs alone, or even that there was a failure. There's merit in openly discussing the intent and consideration behind a message and how they interact with the message's reception. Even if you disagree with or condemn someone else's conclusions, there's merit in understanding the thought process that led them there. None of this is to suggest that an artist alone is responsible for how their work is received, but rather that I think we would all have something to gain from a little humility. Thank you for watching. I hope you liked the video. Consider checking out my channel. You can also check me out on Twitter at Indigo's Findings. See ya!